Welcome everyone! Today we will learn how to unit test your application layer in a .NET application using NUnit. So as a prerequisite, we need to have a clean architecture scheme. You can check out my video about what is clean architecture. I'll provide the link in the description below. So remove the API and persistence layers. We'll focus only on the application layer, which we will our test case. So in the application layer, add a new class called user service, which will contain a single method called register user that will return a new ID, and we will pass a DTO as our parameter. This method will contain the business logic from this layer. So it will be divided in 4 simple steps. The first step is to validate the DTO. So if the DTO.name, which will be the unique field for demo purposes, is null or empty, we will return or will throw a new exception with a validation error message. The second step is to map the DTO into a user entity. We will store the user in a database, so create a new instance of the user entity and map the name. The third step is to store the user in the database. So call DBService, which will be a dependency, and call a create user method by passing the user. This method will return the ID of the new user. And finally, we will send a confirmation email. So add a Boolean property, and this Boolean expression will contain an email service dependency that will invoke a send confirmation email method by passing the user entity. This method will return a Boolean value to check if the email was sent. So if the email wasn't sent, we will throw a new exception with an confirmation email error. And finally, we will return the new ID of the user. So to implement this business logic, add all the classes, methods, and dependencies. So in the application layer, add the create user DTO with a single field name, add a reference to the user entity from the domain, which contains the ID and name, and add the DB service and email service dependencies. We already have an interface for the ID database service. So let's reuse this interface and add the method to register to create the user by receiving the user entity as an argument. Inject this dependency by a construction injection and create a private field in this class, and define the second dependency from the email service. So in the interfaces folder, add a new email service interface with a Boolean method called send confirmation email, which we will receive the user entity, add a reference to this entity, and register the dependency by construction injection, add a field, and we have all the dependencies configured to implement this simple business logic. So now it's time to create a new NUnit test project. So right click in the solution and add a new project. Select the NUnit test project template, define the name of this project, select the latest .NET version. So let's configure the dependencies. We will mock them, the database service and the email service. So let's take advantage of the setup attribute from NUnit that call this method before each test. So create 2 variables in this class for the database and email dependencies. So add a new property and we will mock this DB service. So to do that, we'll install the mock package. You can use any mock tool. So go to the package manager console and type install package and the name of the package. Select the default project, which is unit test, to add all the packages in this project. So far so good. So use the mock class from this library to create a new dependency of type iDatabase service. So add a reference to the application layer and create a new field in this class. Let's set up the create user method from the database to return a valid ID. So to do that, we'll call the setup function and invoke the create user that will receive any user entity, add a reference to the domain, and we will return a valid ID. Add the second dependency by mocking it, which is the email service, in the same way by using the mock object. In this case will be of type iEmail service, which is the second abstraction defined in the application layer. Create a field and set up the send confirmation email from this service to return true by default. So this method will receive any user and will return true. And finally, create a new instance of the user service class from the application layer, which contains the register user method with all the business logic that we want to test. So create a new instance of this class and pass the dependencies. In this case, select the object from the mock and then create a new field for the user service. It's time to write the unit test to cover all the scenarios from the register user business logic in the application layer. So let's define the first test, applying the AAA pattern, arrange, add, and assert. So name this test as should register user, which is the happy path. So define the sections, applying the AAA pattern, arrange, add, and assert. You can use any naming convention for your unit test. So in the arrange section, create a DTO with a valid name. So add a new instance of the create user DTO by defining the name. We'll generate a real name. So you can install any NUnit package to create fake data. For this demo, I will install Bogus to generate a real name. So we'll call the faker class from Bogus, and then with the person object, we will select a random name. So in the add section, we'll invoke the register user method from the user service by passing the DTO, and this method will return the new ID. So in the assess section, we will validate if the ID is a valid ID. So to do that, we will validate if this integer value is greater than 0. So to write clear and readable assert expressions, we will install the last NUnit package for this demo, which is Shultry. You can use any assertion tool to write the assertions in your unit test. So type install package Shultry, and then I will use a method called should be greater than, passing the value from Shultry. So add the reference to the package, and we created the first unit test. Let's cover the failing scenarios in this class. So let me copy the test and add a second test to check if the DTO is invalid. It will throw an exception if the name is null or empty. So this test is called should not register user by validation error. The name from the DTO will be empty for this scenario, and in the add section we'll create an action of type void that basically will invoke the register user method, and with the Shultry package we'll validate if this action throw an exception of this type. We'll pass the action as a parameter, and we will validate the message of this action that should be the same. So go to the user service and copy the validation error message. This is the second unit test when the input DTO is invalid, and the final test is to test if the confirmation email wasn't sent. So call by confirmation email. It should register the user, but it will throw an exception because the confirmation email is not sent. So the DTO will be a valid DTO. So I will copy this line to create a fake name in the add section, add the action, and this action will throw an exception but with a different message or confirmation email error. So with these 3 tests, we're covering all the business logic from the application layer. It's time to run the test. So open the Test Explorer tab and click in this icon to run all the tests. We'll check if all the tests passed, and we have one failing test because by default the send confirmation email will return true. So let's set up this method in the arrange section of the unit test to return false from the send confirmation email method, and then test again. All tests have passed. So we've covered all the business logic from the application layer. So in this demo, we've learned how to unit test your application layer in a .NET application using NUnit.